It's my great pleasure to have the president of the Huntington, Steve Koblik, here with us this evening. He flew in last night, and I'm glad he made time in his schedule. I checked his flight online to see if he had arrived, since so many flights were canceled yesterday. And he got in about 9, and what you'll learn shortly when I read off a little bit of his vita for you is that he's actually a professor of Scandinavian history. He specializes in Sweden. And last night, just for giggles, I checked, and we were 20 degrees colder than Stockholm when he landed last night. So luckily, he feels right at home, even though he's a native Californian. Before becoming the president of the Huntington Library, Art Collections, and Botanical Gardens, he had his academic career started for his BA at the University of California, Berkeley, got his master's from the University of Stockholm, his PhD from Northwestern, and then went on to have careers in several universities and colleges. He was, and I won't read the entire list, however, at Pomona, he was a professor of history, and then he went on to dean of the faculty at Scripps, and then became president of Reed College in 1992, and was there as the president till 2001 when he was appointed president at the Huntington. And you might be wondering, if you've been to the Huntington, you know what a fabulous place it is. It's one of my favorite museums and gardens and rare book libraries in the world. But in this series, which is generously funded by the Lilly Endowment for us, we are looking at finding individuals and institutions that mirror the IMA in some way. And that is not always the easiest thing to do, because we are a great art museum, but we're also so much more than a great art museum. We have 100, as most of you know, on this campus, because we have more than one. We have 152 acres here with a 100-acre park and 52 acres of grounds and gardens around the historic Lilly estate. And in the middle of that sits this great 600,000, more or less, square foot building with one of the world's great art collections, conservation studios, great research facilities here. And then we have Miller House down in Columbus, which is our second campus, which also has a great garden and a collection in it as well. And so we're a very complicated, very, very large institution. I'm now fond of saying, if you turn everything we have into square footage, we are 6.6 million square feet, which is 3 times bigger than the Met. So just to give you kind of put it into the right parameters, and of course the Huntington is a similar institution with great gardens, great research facilities, major art collections. And so I was very interested, after talking to Stephen on the phone, about how their transition from an institution that also at one point in time had some major financial issues, which all of you know. We've been pretty transparent about talking about some of the things we think we need to do here at the IMA. But how do you do all of those things and still manage to be a great museum that cares about scholarship and art and education? And so we were very pleased that he was willing to talk to our staff today. And we got 3/4 of our session was full of questions, which we will also hope will happen tonight. But clearly there's a lot to learn from the Huntington. So with no further ado, let's give Stephen a welcome. And have him start off by telling us a little bit about the Huntington.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Charles. And I've got to say that I've really enjoyed this. Is my first visit to Indianapolis. I've been to other parts of the great state of Indiana, but this is the first time in Indianapolis. So it's been wonderful to come in. I happen to like the weather. This is not a problem. In fact, I like coming to the Midwest. You know that because of my Northwestern background that I'm perfectly familiar. If you check the Chicago temperatures, we'd have beat them. They were probably lower than Indianapolis. But I'm also interested in independent museums, and I've tried as a president of the Huntington to reach out and get to know my colleagues like Charles, although this is the first time we've met, we have mutual friends, but also to go to those museums and see if we can't share experiences and learn from that and become stronger institutions. And so for me, it's a real pleasure. I've been at the Gilchrist a number of times in Tulsa, and I also helped Alice Walton when she was thinking about Crystal Bridges. So, you know, they're interesting intellectual problems, and they're important for the country and for the communities that they exist in. And really in that spirit that I'm here. And I'm not here to talk very much about the Huntington. I was offered the opportunity to have visuals. I've given that up because if you're looking at pretty pictures, you won't look at me, and this way you have nothing else to look at. But I also really want to tell the Huntington story rather briefly, and then I want to try to generalize some ideas so that we'll have a chance to have a conversation. So that's really what I hope to do. So I want to start out, first of all, with an observation and really a philosophy that I use, but I think it's important that you use as well. And that is that each individual museum, each one of us, we're distinctive, we're unique. And we're unique because we have a unique collection, we have a unique culture, and we're in a specific context. And every context is different. So if you listen to the story of the Huntington tonight, or the story of the Corning Glassware, or a colleague who's going to be succeeding me in terms of talking to you, we can tell you what we did. And we may even understand at least some of what we did. But you don't want to say, oh, you know, then the IMA has to do that. You have to do what's right for you. So there are things we can talk about in general that we all share. But finally, the solutions to the issues that each of us face have to be domestic. They have to be within your own context, within your own institution. So I want to make that clear, that I don't hold the Huntington up as anything other than the Huntington and what happened at the Huntington. So what I'll do, I'm going to describe the Huntington as it is a day and a half ago when I left. And so that's kind of the Huntington of today. And then I'm going to describe the Huntington I inherited in 2001. So I've been president for 12 years, and you're going to immediately see there's some big changes. And then I'm going to identify 5 things that I can generalize and talk about in ways that I hope will stimulate your thinking as you think about the IMA or any other organization, nonprofit organization that you are involved in. Because I really, this idea in terms of what I'm doing was actually a product of an experience we had at the Huntington, where we tried to do something we thought was going to be virtually impossible, and it turned out we did almost twice as much. And we couldn't believe it. We didn't know, and we kind of said, well, that isn't what we thought when we started, so how did we get here? So a group of us unraveled it and tried to develop some what I'm going to call generalizations that I could share, or that we actually put this into an essay that has my name at the bottom, but at least 20 fingerprints, distinct fingerprints are on it. So that's what I'm going to do. So let me start, and let me introduce the Huntington. We call ourselves a collections-based research and education institution. So collections-based, meaning everything we do is based on 3 great collections: rare books and manuscripts and ephemera, paper, plants, we have a garden collection, and art. And we have both decorative arts as well as paintings and works on paper. So we have 3 great collections: a collections-based education and research and education institution. Note, no museum in the title. And I tried to forbid everyone from using the word at the Huntington after I got there, because I wanted the people to think about the Huntington as a dynamic institution which served multiple audiences. And I'll get to that in a moment in terms of audience. But I wanted people to think of us in as creative, that we were not stagnant, that when people think of, it's not fair to think of museums as stagnant, but that's the way many people think of them. I don't want to go to the museum, it's an old stodgy place. And so I didn't want people to think of us as an old stodgy place. That was a shift, and we branded ourselves that way. So every staff member uses the same terminology. We're a collections-based research and educational institution. We often get questions, what does that mean? And we compare ourselves to a research university. And we say research universities are about people. They're about faculty, they're about students. The Huntington is about our collections. So you start with what I'm going to call a different leveraging principle. It's the collections that are important. So we start with that, and then we move out in terms of describing the Huntington. So let me do that for you. I'm going to start with space, and Charles has already started to describe that. We have 206 acres, which is half again as big as this very large property. 130 acres of the 206 are under formal cultivation. So they're botanical gardens. They're collections. They're not beautiful gardens, although some of them are beautiful. They are collections. And we have a prejudice or a predisposition in our collecting. We're not interested in being a universal collector. Rather, we have specialized in every one of our collecting areas. So we try to collect deeply for research purposes rather than broadly. And that would be true in art, it would be true in the library, and it's true in the gardens as well. So we have specialized gardens, the most famous of which is the desert garden. And as a succulent garden, it's probably the finest succulent garden in the world. It draws huge numbers of people. But we also have in the gardens cultural gardens. So we have both a Japanese garden and a Chinese garden. Both have buildings in them. In fact, when my board saw what we were going to do, the Chinese garden is new, the Japanese garden is over 100 years old. So Mr. Huntington built the Japanese garden, but the Chinese garden I did, and with lots of help from my staff. And when my board saw the drawings, they said, "Where's the gardens? It's nothing but buildings." It's a scholar's garden, and there's plenty of gardens, but it was a very different cultural experience from a garden perspective than the Japanese garden is. So it's really quite fascinating. We have curators who are specialists in the cultures as well as in the plant life, in the gardens. So we have 130 acres. We have 700,000 square foot in buildings, close to what you have here at the IMA, but the largest building we have is about 90,000, so we have more of them. We have 6 libraries, which will tell you the size of the library. We have 3 art galleries, including the Huntington Mansion, which has about 60,000 square feet of gallery space in it. We have a botanical center. We have under construction a very large project. It refashions how you enter the Huntington, and it is 6 acres of new gardens, California Mediterranean gardens, something we've not had before, ironically. It is 2 auditorium, it's a beautiful garden court, it's a restaurant, coffee shop, commercial store, ticketing, but it's 45,000 square feet of basement, which is my part of the project, because it's a statement that we continue to be an aggressive collecting institution, which is what we want to be, continue to be a collecting institution. So we have a lot of space in terms of buildings. In terms of audience, it's a really interesting topic. Who is it that we want to serve? And most people, when they think of that, think there must be an obvious answer. At the Huntington, there is no obvious answer. We have 6 audiences, distinct audiences that we have identified as groups that we need to serve. They demand, each one of the audiences demands different priorities, both in terms of institutional investment and in terms of staff time. And they're all critical to us. So if you talk to anyone who's at the Huntington, senior staff member, a board member, and say, let's talk about audiences, we've all debated that. We've gone on retreats for 2 days and debated it. So I'm going to give you my ordering of our audiences, okay? It's only mine. It's not an official. We haven't posted this listing, but in fact, I can tell you that when I make or try to make decisions, this is the way I think about the institution. So the first audience that I serve, the Huntington serves, is 1,700 scholars. We're the largest humanities research institute in the United States. Only the Library of Congress and the New York Public Library have more humanists on a regular basis in their institution doing research. But no research university is even close. So we are a huge research university, a research humanities program, and that's what Mr. Huntington wanted. And I feel a responsibility as president of the Huntington to always think about the founder. It isn't in our trust document. We could do all sorts of other things if we wanted to. The trustees have full capacity, according to the trust document, to steer the institution as they think it's appropriate. But I think all of us share this notion that this is what Mr. Huntington wanted. He wanted a research library. And so that's my first audience. My second audience might surprise you. It's 90 board members. And you think, well, that's really rather peculiar. I have two boards, a 5-person trustee board. They have fiduciary responsibilities. But I have a 68-member overseer board, and they have governing. All of the governance of the institution is done at the overseer level, not at the trustee level, which is very interesting and very unusual. And then I have about close to 20 emeriti board members who have remained active after they went emeriti. 90 board members is a fabulous number. They carry the institution financially. 60% of all giving and all nonprofits is carried by boards. That's the national number. If you've got a strong board, and we have a strong board, both boards are really good, and if you look out for them, they're fabulous. And you've got to remember that these are people who are generous across a whole range of institutions. They're not just generous at the Huntington. They're generous to the Children's Hospital, to their alma maters, to their own hospitals, to religious institutions, to operas, and all sorts of other things. We want to be one of their 3 top charities. That's been our goal. It didn't exist when I came. So I pay attention to the board members, and we do things for them that they love, and that it makes them think that the Huntington is important for each of them. So for me, that audience is absolutely critical. You can argue about all of this, by the way, when we get done. I've got 33,000 members. This is, again, quite deliberate. We've doubled membership in the last 10 years at the Huntington. And again, we've done this, and I'll explain how we did it. And what that means is base membership at the Huntington costs $150 now for a year, family of 4. And I have people who, that's a real stretch to be members, and I have people who are billionaires and are members at $150. But the one thing that they have in common is they're in my database. And I can do research on them. And we can figure out who they are and what they represent and which ones we should target as we try to move them up in the donor giving area. So the 31,000 give us $150 a year. But I've got 500 families who give us a minimum of $2,500 a year, 500. And the total giving of that group, which is called the Society of Fellows, is $4 million in annual giving. That's the equivalent of 5% out of $80 million in endowment. That's big dollars. And Charles would kill me to get that. It's great annual giving. It is so important to the operation of the institution. Cash is unbelievably important to our institutions. And we don't have, as we did in the university, tuition and room and board. And so annual giving is really important. And I'll talk about fundraising a little later. But for me, the audience, and we do all sorts of things for all those 33,000 members. So each level has a whole series of activities related to them. And they are critical for us. We have about 1,000 K through 12 teachers that we are working with. And that number will probably triple in the next 2 years because the Pasadena School District, which is a big, urban, poor school district, has asked the Huntington to train all of their teachers, K through 12, all fields, in teaching pedagogy with the Common Core. And we have the capacity to do that and are in the process of setting up the mechanism. Common Core is this revolutionary new development in K through 12. Everyone, well, 45 of the 50 states is going through this, and they have underfunded it. Big surprise. And so the teaching core, which was trained in a different pedagogy, has to be trained to teach in a new pedagogy, and the school districts don't have the money. So in our case, we're stepping in terms of Pasadena. We're also stepping into LAUSD, not the whole school district. That would be crazy, but we've identified a series of Title I schools which means you have, 80 or 90% of all your students live below the poverty line, elementary school, middle school, and a high school, and we're working with all three entities to develop teaching models that then can be used by the school district, and one of them was art through the K through 6 curriculum. So we're developing models that can be used without us, because we're trying to leverage our work with our teachers. We love the kids, and that's the next audience. That's the fifth audience. We bring in about 30,000 school kids a year on school programs. We love it. We've been doing it since the 30s. But the trouble is that it doesn't have a sustained impact. Some kids will remember, some kids won't remember. That's fine. But we would really like to make sure that we really are aiding in the educational process. So we actually put the teachers, because they're going to teach hundreds of kids, and they'll do it in their classrooms. And if we can impact the teachers, they'll have a bigger impact on the kids. And if they want to bring the kids, then they can bring them. By the way, all these school districts have lost their funding for busing to come to the institution, so we have just volunteered to bring anyone who wants to come. So we provide money. That's easy dollars to raise, by the way. That's not a difficult issue. So there's 5 of the 6 audiences, and you probably noticed I haven't mentioned the general public. We get 600,000 visitors a year. Or I should put it differently. We get 600,000 day visits a year. We went to court before I got there in 1994 and got the right from the court to charge admission. We started charging in 1994. I came in, and I've been in the elite liberal arts college world. And in that world, you raise your price as quickly as you can, as high as you can, because the public is willing to pay it. And all of you who had kids or grandkids know this, we're outrageous. Well, it turns out to work more or less the same at the Huntington. So we have jacked up the price since I got there from $8 to $23. And all we've gotten out of it is more revenue. We haven't had any change in visitorship, although what we did by this pricing was drive everyone into membership, which is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to move them into, if you were local, we wanted to move them into being members. Because on average, each member will visit the Huntington 7 times a year, on average. So of those 600 day visits, over half are members. The day visits are people who come from the west side, which is a foreign country, and they come over to the east side, and we give them shots and stamp their passport, and they come to the Huntington, and they're price indifferent. The other people are tourists. We get a strong group of tourists who come, and they're price insensitive too. They're not, we follow the Met. That's the marker that we use, and you can properly say, well, what about the people who can't afford any? We work on that directly. So besides having a free day once a month, we work in communities. So all of these schools, we have school passes so the kids and their families can come and go to the Huntington for free. We work with retirement centers where they're serving a population that doesn't have much financial capacity. We make visiting the Huntington free. It's relatively easy, in short, from my perspective, to serve underrepresented communities at the Huntington. And what we've discovered, if we develop programs, intellectual programs, we have an African American community, a large one and a historic one in Pasadena. Jackie Robinson, among others, is from that community. We started doing programs on materials that we have in African American culture. And we publicized it, and we got filled auditoriums with our neighbors who were African Americans, who came, who had never been there before, and said, we want more. So we have gotten into a process. Now, in San Marino, where we are, it's 60% Chinese. And if you could have counted the number of Chinese who visited the Huntington in 1990, 20% of 33,000 members are Chinese today. So there's been a huge demographic shift. And again, the audience, it's not that the day audience is unimportant, but we're probably one of the few museums in the country that doesn't want to maximize attendance. And one reason is because we at the Huntington, and that's board as well as the staff, want people to feel the experience of being on an estate. And we want them to be able to enjoy the art and the garden, which is primarily why they come, in a peaceful and tranquil way. So to go into a Japanese garden, for example, and have to fight a crowd is not what Japanese gardens are about. And when we wanted to build a Chinese scholars garden, all of our Chinese donors said, you know, Steve, these are private gardens, meaning don't let too many people make noise, don't let baby strollers in there, and all sorts of other things that they didn't want to see, and that we learned about as a result. So we like to have the best experience possible. We want people to feel that the Huntingtons are still alive and you've been invited into the estate. That means we don't want a large number of people, no more than 5,000 in any given day. Now that seems like a lot, but believe me, when I first came, we had certain days that were over 10. And it was a zoo, including statuaries being painted. Their fingernails and their toenails, Greek statues, were being painted with red nail polish. It was really very exciting and not good for the statues. So the other fact is that the city of San Marino, where we exist, doesn't want a lot of people either. So it's a nice harmony, as a matter of fact. So we don't maximize our attendance. We could grow a couple of 100,000, but we want them during the week. And we want them in the fall, because those are our low. We can tell you almost exactly when visitors are coming to the Huntington. We know. We've done a lot of work at trying to understand when they come and when they don't come. So 6 audiences, starting with scholars, and the last audience is the general public. And you probably wouldn't have thought about that. And we, as I said, we talk about this a lot. Research. We have 2 advanced research institutions, 2 with USC, 1 with Caltech. We have our own academic press, it's the second oldest in California. We have a huge array of academic conferences and lectures for the general public and for our members. It's a really central part of what we are, but we're also now much more active in botanical research because of the Botanical Center. We're able to do, in terms of plants, we need to protect the plants, we need to preserve the plants, and we need to reproduce the plants. And we're actually, the latest thing that we're going into is cryogenics, which is at the cutting edge of botanical research. And we've been working with biologists both at Caltech and UC Irvine. So we have also research going on in the art division, as well as the garden, as well as the library. The library, by the way, the main part of the library is only open to the 1,700 scholars. So if you walked in and wanted to go into the library, you would not be permitted. We have a library exhibition, which is fabulous, but that's just the exhibition. It's just a small tip of what we have. Education has been our fastest growing area, and we have the full complement of informal education, which you would find at any museum. But what's really different is we're really going into formal education and into K through 12. We're really working at that. We don't think the public school system, I mean, in California it is and I have a friend who went to kindergarten with me here. And when we went to kindergarten, which was a long time ago, and I was in the Middle Ages, she of course was not. But we were ranked as one of the best public school systems in the country. We are now ranked 47th. This is intolerable, but the school systems on their own are not capable of turning this around. And of course, because California is an immigrant state, because we have huge minorities, it's those ethnic groups which are carrying the burden of this, and they're our future. So for us, and the board shares this passion, for us, serving that group and really trying to help K through 12 is one of the most exciting things we do. And I hired a new director of education last year. She was a full professor, distinguished scholar at the University of California. She gave up her tenure to become the director of education at the Huntington. And she is just a tremendous addition to the institution. She can walk the walk and she can talk the talk of research, and she's committed to public education. It's fabulous. And again, it legitimizes the Huntington in terms of serving multiple audiences. The staff, we have 478 part-time and full-time staff, about 435 staff. We have 1,200 volunteers. 600 of them are docents. We treat the volunteers and the staff as full partners. So the 1,200 volunteers are treated just like we treat all employees, and they do a fabulous job. We'd collapse without them. Financially, $40 million a year is about what we spend in terms of budgets, both unrestricted and restricted. We now have a $440 million endowment. You'll see that's a slight change from when I arrived. We talk about funding the Huntington a three-legged stool. 5% out of endowment, annual giving is the second leg of the stool, and earned revenues is the third. And what we discovered during the recession, the Great Recession, was having those three legs was critical, because one or two of them might really go down, but if one was solid, we could survive more effectively. So, for example, annual giving during the Great Recession was larger than payout out of the endowment. Payout out of the endowment dropped to 28% of our revenues during 1 year, and annual giving went up to 35%. And the earned revenue is in the 20s, 20 to 25%. So, and we're really working on that. This is a commitment, we kind of blood pledge that we've made to ourselves that we would find ways to earn money. And it's a really interesting challenge, but I think the whole staff feels it. So I get all sorts of cockamamie, and we've legitimized cockamamie ideas. So everyone you can have a crazy idea and you can send it in, and the senior staff will consider it, because sometimes they're not cockamamie, they're really good. We get no public monies. So that's the Huntington. What was it like when I arrived in 2001? Let me first say that my predecessor had done a wonderful job. He had started in 1988, which he was president for 12 years. He was the first person to try to manage the Huntington. It was a self-congratulatory, inward-looking organization that really wasn't very outward-oriented. It had no senior staff. There was no chief financial officer. He did all of that. He revolutionized board governance, which was critical to what I've been able to do. So my predecessor was very, very successful. However, when he came in, the primary problem facing the Huntington was financial. And when he left, the primary problem facing the institution was financial. And the reason for that was it's really tough to move ahead and create things and not create other liabilities. And that's exactly what happened. He did something that was quite wonderful. He educated my boards to the fact that the finances were as bad in 2001 as they had been in 1988. So I didn't have to come in and convince everyone things were bad. They knew it. Now, that was the good news. The bad news was, and that was part of what I inherited a 15% budget deficit. We were taking 7% out of an endowment of 150, so the endowment is now 3 times the size it was when I arrived. We had future commitments, particularly in exhibitions, with no controls. So our curators were planning exhibitions without any instructions about what they should cost, and we didn't know where we were going to get the money. A minor problem. Both of our boards were tired of giving, and they made that clear that we should go raise money from you folks in Indianapolis rather than get money from our boards. I'm not joking. We had an outside consultant come in, and they voted 100% to go get the money somewhere else. I had to fire my chief development officer over that because she actually took it seriously. And the local foundations were also upset because we were in silos. I inherited an institution like a research university, so there was a garden silo, a library silo, and an art silo, and they competed with each other. So if you were a donor, you might get the visit from 3 different members of the Huntington on the same day, all asking you for stuff. So I got this chorus of, get them off my back, Steve, please. I inherited that, and over $100 million in deferred maintenance. So that's what I inherited, and no agreement on priorities. So the institution I described to begin with and the institution I inherited were very different. And it's really difficult to explain how we got from A to D, because we have. But I have to assure you, when I started, I had no idea how to deal with these problems. The good news was that neither did my board and neither did my staff. So we were all at the same place. And actually that turned out to be really good. We had a joint adventure, and you'll see that I've generalized that in a moment. But I can tell you that 12 years later, we have raised over $700 million in gifts. Now that's at an institution that did not have a culture of giving. The Huntington is flourishing in every area of its activities. All of the deferred maintenance has been taken care of. We have new buildings, new gardens, and huge additions in our collections, and we have no debt. And I have a large group of individuals and families, something in excess of 50,000 names, who are now part of my donor pool, my natural donor pool. I'm not going to really explain how we did this, but I have thought about it. And what I want to do is identify what I think the principles are that you might take and play with in the context of the IMA or in the context of any other nonprofit, because I really think about the nonprofit world in similarities. The first principle, I'll give you 5. Clarity of mission, and I want to come back and talk about that, because it isn't clear in most places. Leadership as a group, not leadership as one person. Communication, the centrality of communication. The centrality, the 4th thing is discipline and priorities. You have to put your money where your priorities are. That sounds obvious, but if you only think about your own budget, you know you don't necessarily do that, and you really have to do it in a nonprofit because we're all hard-pressed. And 5th, there is a 6th thing I'll talk about at the end, and that's donor engagement. If you don't engage your donors, you're not going anywhere. And that's, you saw already in my audience summary how important I take both my 90 board members and my 33,000 members. You've got to have a donor base that really is excited about what you do. Clarity of mission. What I mean is not a mission statement. Everyone has a mission statement, and they're kind of goody two-shoes. Apple pie, motherhood, everything you always want is kind of listen to a president talk to Congress at the beginning of every budget cycle. This is all I want to do. And we all know, of course, they're not going to do most of it. But nonprofits have the same problem. They list too many things that they want to do, and you can't do them all. But they list them. And then the institution as a whole doesn't have a clear sense of priorities. I've tried to say that at the Huntington, we should have no more than 3 priorities. And we have to discuss to a focal point what they are. And they cross all of our activities, the 3 collecting areas, research, and education. All of that has to be considered as a whole. And the whole institution has to buy into this. How do we do that? Strategic planning. So every 5 years, we do a strategic plan. We did the first one in 2003. We're doing one. It takes 18 months. So we start in the 2003, 2008, 2013. We're doing our 3rd strategic plan. It takes 18 months. It's iterative, and everyone's involved. The boards, the staff, the volunteers, everybody's involved. Everyone has a voice, but we come to a conclusion, and the conclusion is 3 priorities, as Charles said, because he's looked at them. He said, well, you only have 3, and they tend to be the same 3 things. Not surprising. Staff compensation. If you can't have a good staff and you can't pay them appropriately, you won't be able to keep them, and they won't be as productive as you want. So staff compensation. Huntington, as most museums have done, have underpaid their staff. You can't get away with that. It won't work anymore. 2, 5% payout rate. You have to be fiscally responsible. It's so important to do that because it means you can go out and get more money because donors know you're handling their money with care and with conservatism, and they want that. So 5% payout rate was really hard to get from 7 to 5, really hard, but we did it quickly. And the 3rd thing is no deferred maintenance. Now, all of the goodies that everyone wants, depending on where you are in the institution, we all want goodies, is extra. So the boards and the staff know that When we're talking about ourselves financially, those three things are where we're going to invest. So we had a question at the staff meeting. When I started, 65% of my staff earned less than $35,000. 65%. The three biggest parts of my staff are security, the gardeners, and the janitors. It's not surprising. Those are the competitive wages in the Los Angeles area. You can get gardeners cheap, security people cheap, janitors cheap. But we want staff that can live on the wages that they earn. That number is down below 25% today. That's been a huge investment on the part of the Huntington, both the senior staff and the boards, and they've been fully supportive of this. Because we want our staff to be able to live on what they do, because we want their attention. And it's not just an 8-to-5 job. You know, we really need them at all sorts of different times. So getting a mission with priorities, so people can then say, can we afford X in the context of A, B, and C? And that is a much easier discussion. So just before I left, we had a senior staff meeting, and there were two issues where we weren't in our financial boundaries. We'd broken out of them, and I just said, fix it. We're not going to do this. It isn't appropriate. And there wasn't an argument, because we all knew you can't do this. If you spend money on exhibitions, for example, and we had just had an exhibit where we overspent our budgets, that impacts what we can pay people. This is a common pot. We can't just pull money out of thin air. You've got to be fiscally responsible. So clarity of mission and a buy-in from everybody is critical. Leadership, therefore, should be a group. It's not Charles. I mean, CEO, I love this. You know, people say, "What's your vision for the institution?" You know, well, whatever my vision is for the institution, it's not really very interesting. The vision for the institution has got to be the group of us. It's got to be the boards. It's got to be the whole staff. We've all got to be part of that. And we've got to know it so that we can make decisions wherever we are. Do you know who the face of the Huntington is for our visitors? It's the security guards. That's who our visitors talk to. And if the security guards don't know what it is that we're trying to do, and they're talking to the visitors are going to get a really cockamamie view of what the Huntington is. So we really work at being transparent. All the staff, all the volunteers get the same budget the board does. Everybody. And in good time and chance to think about it and to make comments. Very open. If you walked in off the street and said, you came into the administration building and said, I want to see your budget, we would put you in contact with the CFO. Jerry would be happy to hear that. And she would go right through the budget with you and explain how to read a budget. We don't publish it because I'm not a fan of the digital age, but it is completely available. And so transparency, knowledge, and responsibility of everybody. Every staff member is important. A janitor is important, a curator is important, senior staff members, everyone's important. You maximize the production of the institution if everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing and does it without being told. And often you get ideas going up as well as ideas coming down as a result. It's really exciting, really exciting. Communication is absolutely central. And it's top down, it's up, it's bottom up, and you have to broaden the base. You've got to get information out. We've redone all our communication. We've got a real toughie who's the vice president for public affairs, and she has corralled all her colleagues, so if you mess with her, you might disappear in terms of communication. And the result has been fabulous, because now we have messages that we can get out, we know what we're saying, and in the digital age, we actually do participate. You know, we have blogs, we have all of the junk that you now expect in the social media, and all of that is coordinated with our print media. Everything is designed to focus on our mission and our priorities in our mission and the excitement of the institution. People like to be involved in exciting places. And they like to be involved in places that serve the community, the local community. And we can do that. We do it, and they get to know it. Donor engagement. We do all sorts of things to engage donors. And because we've built this donor base of 33,000 members, and almost all our activities are intellectual. They're all educational. We do one major social event a year. It's a ball. It's black tie. We earn about $400,000, and I would kill it if I could, but I have some key board members that love it, and so we do it, you know. And we don't really earn $400,000 because that doesn't include any of our staff time that goes into it. And if you started costing that out, we'd probably make 27 cents. But it's important to them, and then it makes it important to me. And by the way, the ball is really just a party. It's really fun. We go somewhere in the garden. We have about 400 people. And the only one who speaks is me, and I speak for 30 seconds. I thank the ball chairman, and that's it. No advertising, nothing. So no one has to worry. You come to the ball and have fun. So those are the 5 things that I think you have to think about. Clarity of mission with priorities, leadership as a group effort, communication up, down, and sideways, discipline and priorities, no silos, fiscal rigor. And again, it has to be done at the lowest level possible. If we have to do it as senior staff, we're too late. So the screw up in this latest exhibit was because all the people involved somehow decided not to pay attention. And next Tuesday, we're going to have a serious conversation as senior staff about that. We've been working on the conversation for 2 weeks now. And then there's one other thing, and I've got to admit that. You have to be lucky. Luck isn't something that happens in a lottery. We raised $700 million. We've raised a lot more than that, as a matter of fact. But there were opportunities that came because of the excitement that I've described, because of the number of people. The number of people. It means opportunities. And you have to be fast on your feet. I'll give you an example. I'm leading a tour, and I'm in Naples, Italy. And I get a phone call from the president of Caltech, who's a Nobel Prize winner by the name of David Baltimore. And David says, "Hey, Steve, are you interested in a big history of science library?" And I said, sitting in Naples, enjoying my pizza, "Sure, that sounds like a good idea. You know, I don't know anything about the library. I don't have any idea where we would put, you fill in the blanks." But I said, "Sure, David, it's a good idea." Well, a year and a half later, we have a gift of 68,000 books, rare books on the history of science and manuscripts, worth over $100 million. We have $15 million from the family foundation that own the books and manuscripts, because they had to pay for everything. They had to move it, they had to build the shelving, but we did have a place to put it. And we beat out IU. It's a great history of science program. We beat out University of Michigan, we beat out Yale, we beat out my alma mater, Berkeley, and Stanford. 17 institutions competed for this. We were the ones that got it. We were the ones that got it because we were quick on our feet. We were able to make decisions. We've bought art the same way. We work as a team. And the board, I can get a decision out of my trustees in 24 hours. So if we see something, it doesn't matter where I am, it'll happen if we want to do it. So that's luck. It comes up, but you have to be able to take advantage of it when it comes to you. So think about that when you're thinking about nonprofits. Think about prioritizing communication, leadership, discipline, making tough decisions. You cannot do everything. Thank you.
Thank you.